one of the early pitfalls that I witness in companies is what I call title inflation. In the early days, you want to recruit that certain someone, and titles feel much cheaper than compensation, right?
The main thing is, first of all, if someone, especially early, is joining you for the title, that is a bad sign. It's like mailing yourself a letter bomb 2 years from now and be like, you're no longer the CMO, and it will
I really like
explode.
that phrasing. Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is, okay, I need a COO that's going to basically solve all my problems.
I need a magic unicorn.
Exactly.
I invest in companies now, and I'd say I have more conversations with founders about firing their COO than hiring right now.
So at what stage do you advise founders to really start thinking about hiring a superstar COO like yourself?
コーラルではあらゆる業界ステージの資金調達の相談に積極的に乗っています。概要欄の URL からぜひお問い合わせください。お待ちしています。
All right, so Claire, welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be
This
here.
is your 5th time in Tokyo?
I think it's my 4th, but it might be the 5th.
Okay.
It's good when you lose count, right?
Right. That is good. Please come more often.
I'm going to.
So for me, this book is a must read. In fact, if the Japanese version was out, I would probably include it with every term sheet that we give to portfolio companies. I would say like the Bible on company building or encyclopedia. But from what I understand, Claire, you also are not a huge fan of business books in general. So why did you write a business book?
Yeah, that is a little known fact. I don't think I've finished any business book that I've started because most of the good content is in the beginning, right? You just read the first part and then they sort of start repeating themselves. Well, I did not want to write a book. As you heard, my career is not as an author, but Patrick and John Collison, the Stripe co-founders, decided that a book like this did not exist for founders. In their journey founding Stripe, they read a lot of books looking for advice, and they wanted a much more specific and tactical company building and management advice, which this book does both of those things. And I said, okay, I agree. There is a space in the market for such a book. I still don't know why I have to write it, but maybe I was the best person they knew to do it, which I take as a compliment. I feel very fortunate that John and Patrick, of course, they are very successful founders. And they did found this, and it was also pretty successful. We've sold over 1 million copies of the book.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
Turns out more than 1,000 people wanted to read it, which is what I predicted. I was like, I hope we sell 1,000 copies.
Amazing. So, there are a lot of startup founders here, and one of the early pitfalls that I witness in companies is what I call title inflation. And in the early days, you want to recruit that certain someone, and titles feel much cheaper than compensation, right? And what we often see is, the early engineer is the CTO. Whether or not that person is the right person to be CTO, when you scale up, is kind of irrelevant. They kind of put that title in. What advice do you have to me in the early days when I'm trying to balance between the the desire and the sort of requirement to hire great people, but at the same time, titles are they're cheap in the short term and very expensive in the long term.
They're very expensive in the long term. Yeah, so this is a topic that Patrick and I very violently agreed on, almost too much so. I would say Stripe has now suffered from our lack of titles, but I still would make the same decision, which is I have so much to say on this. I have to think for a minute how to keep it efficient. The main thing is, first of all, if someone, especially early, is joining you for the title, that is a bad sign. Either you're not able to explain your vision and get them excited about what you're building very well, so you got to figure that out. You'd have trouble raising money too. Or they have some mercenary element in them that is just not appropriate, especially at an early stage company. So number one is it's just not a great signal that becomes important. And I get there are some people who care a lot about that. You can hire them later maybe, but you don't want them early. You want people who are believers. and want to build it with you and aren't going to fight about stuff like that, because early stage companies also, everything changes all the time. Like the job you're hiring for them, it's like they're not going to be doing that job for more than 5 minutes. We all know that, you know. So you got to be thinking about appropriateness for your stage and people's motivations. That's number one. Number two is titles. People get very stuck on, I mean, we're animals and we like hierarchy and we like to figure out where we fit. And any signal you give to someone of where they fit and then you try to take it away is highly disruptive to them, to the point about the long. I say it's like mailing yourself a letter bomb. You're like, and then I'm going to open the mailbox 2 years from now and be like, you're no longer the CMO. And it will explode.
Like that phrasing, yeah.
Yeah, it will explode. And so I would say that to Patrick. I'm like, well, do we want to mail ourselves that letter bomb? And we'd laugh. No, we don't. But I get it. I get the uncanny. There's this like moment where you can't really attract talent. You don't have a lot of money. You don't have you shouldn't use titles, so you really got to use a lot of like elbow grease and time and 50 hours maybe spending with certain candidates, and that's hard to contemplate. But the title thing to me is also, there's I guess 2 other reasons. I have a lot to say. So another is if you're dealing with external customers and partners and you are a small company and everyone is running around as a VP, it's actually not a great signal or look for the company either, because people who are savvy, so if you're talking to, for Stripe, banking partners or larger companies, and you're like, well, this is our VP of, you know, X, they're like, really? You're like 40 people and you have 6 VPs? I mean, that's just like a weird, there's something about it that just seems off-brand and unrealistic, and that you're trying to be bigger than you are, that can be kind of a weird signal. So that makes me worried on the external. On the internal, you are going to end up layering people no matter what from your early days, and if you've given them titles, you know, they may just leave, and they also may think they have a scope and responsibility and decision-making ability. Like, say they think they're the CMO, that means they think they get to spend all your marketing budget, and they may not actually know how to do that. So there's some other challenges with it.
So Stripe in the early days, you guys had a sort of like hack for this, like, you know, this is the so-and-so lead.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're big fans of non-title titles, like head of growth. Or growth lead was a popular one. Growth lead for anything. I was comfortable with a lot of growth leads because it's just like, what is that? Actually, my title right now, I'm a corporate officer and advisor.
Sounds important.
But Patrick was like, corporate officers matter, right? Because you have to list them in your filings. And I was like, but I don't think that's actually a title. He's like, perfect. Anyway, so I really think that I really think you can find ways around this, or just head of at least. Ideally, don't make it head of a really big thing, but, you know, even head of marketing, like, you can navigate from that if you have to then hire a CMO a little more easily than if you said to someone, you're the CMO.
But they wanted you to be something like head of business development or something.
Oh,
like
that's
that was their early title.
They recruited me as COO, and that was a legitimate choice, since I was getting recruited to be a COO by a couple of other growth stage companies and had offers for that role. And that was basically the only role I was going to take. They were like, well, what about you start as head of sales? I was like, no, I'll build sales, but I need more purview than that. And then right as I was about to agree to join, they, I think, got worried, because it's a big deal. That COO in particular, because it's not a well-defined position, the only definition people have in their heads is often like right hand to the CEO. And that feels like a lot of power to give someone that is an unknown entity. And I agree. I think it's actually quite risky. I think all this outside COO hiring, I invest in companies now, and I'd say I have more conversations with founders about firing their COO than hiring right now. So that could be another topic we get to. But I think they got cold feet about, like, do we want to hand this person we don't really know, despite all the hours we've spent together, this important seeming title? And they also had already, despite the title thing, already given that title to a colleague of mine who was helping to recruit me. The good news is he was like, I don't want this. He was like, I don't want to build, like, do the scaling stuff. He was really our head of BD, strategic partnerships. But they realized if I came in, one, looking like I got all this power, and two, that I'd taken his job, it might not be good. And they said, so we have an idea. We're going to call you head of business operations. And I was like, and I am not going to join because we just went through 6 months of talking about COO. So you have to be careful. You cannot take it back, is I guess the real lesson, right? Yeah. But what we did do is bring me in as chief of business operations, not as COO for the reasons around the colleague of mine, which I actually thought was legitimate. I was like, yeah, I don't want to come in looking like I took somebody's job who's a well-liked person. And so a few months after I joined, Patrick sent a very short email to the company, which was like, oh, by the way, Billy is now chief business officer and Claire's now the COO. Goodbye. And people were like, oh, fine. Because by then I had passed
credibility and
I'd passed some kind of test that it seemed legitimate. And also I think it was clear internally that I was not coming in to be the proxy for the CEO in this case. Right. That's true in some companies. It's really was not true for Stripe.
So on the COO topic, another question that we often get from founders is, okay, so they raise their seed round, they have product market fit, and then they've raised their Series A, and they need to scale the thing. And the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, I need a COO that's going to basically solve all my problems.
I need a magic unicorn.
Exactly. I just wave a magic wand, and Sheryl Sandberg, Claire will show up.
Neither Sheryl nor I are perfect, it turns out.
So at what stage do you advise founders to really start thinking about hiring a superstar COO like yourself?
So I'm not convinced it is the right move. I mean, I know a lot of investors like to push that on founders, and so it's tricky because I'm not sure I'm a big advocate for it.
Interesting. Please tell more.
Well, here's the pro argument. The pro argument is you've just had to be a product builder to get to product market fit, and that's your skill set. And all of a sudden you have to be a company builder. At the same time, you're still doing the product stuff. And that is a lot. So the pro argument is, how can I get leverage with the company building or the product building, but usually with the company building, so that I am not drowning trying to figure out both of these things, especially because you've probably never built a company before. And in that case, it does, especially for growth stage companies, Series B, C, above, like having someone who can span across multiple functions and be sort of a partner on the company side is very valuable if it's the right person. I think it's tricky, as we discussed, to put someone from the outside in that position because they really have to, like that hire is a very big signal, and the blast radius, if they are bad, is large. So the thing that I've said to many founders is think about a way either to bring someone in a functional leadership role and have your eye on them to become a COO, even if it's for 6 months, honestly. But like, do I really need to give them the COO title out of the gate? Could I hire a chief of business operations? Could I hire I've seen actually quite a bit of CFOs becoming sort of COOs in some startups lately, and I get it. Some of them are more operational. It's not perfectly, it depends on the company. It depends on the business model, to be honest, but it's possible. The other thing Stripe did that was very smart that I've advocated to many companies I invest in is they built this team called BizOps. BizOps is a thing. Like you'll see it at big companies too. It means different things like COO at different companies. But for Stripe, it was sort of this Swiss Army knife team that was like, we're going to hire really smart generalists who are good at figuring stuff out, who maybe they've had some consulting training, private equity, banking training, but they have some entrepreneurial streak. That was our profile that we had. And they were like our first product people. They were our first sales people. They built functions that we didn't have. Like it was a very smart move. I came in and they were like I was then leading that team. And I was like, oh, this is a good asset because it's this flexible, resilient, talented group that helps me figure stuff out.
SWAT team.
Yeah, like a SWAT team. But I've said to some founders, why don't you hire like a head of BizOps and see if they can grow into or even do some of the company building leverage work. Right. And see if they can grow into COO. And that kind of works. Too often, though, I see the founders hiring someone that's a little bit more like a consultant. And the key is the COO role has to have operational experience. Like you cannot be a staff role. You have to have had your butt on the line Like, I mean, at Google at one point, I had $11 billion quota. I was like, if you haven't really been on the line running, you know, a big, like something meaningful operationally with all the human problems, I don't think you're a great candidate. But I think it's tricky because you hand it, you know, again, I'm seeing a lot of the firing. How can you try it out is really the question, that person, before you give them a title that people feel like is pretty important.
Right. So a lot of people probably, especially in Japan, probably don't know that you also used to work with Sheryl Sandberg.
I did.
At Google. And I would argue that you two are two of the best CEOs in Silicon Valley. And there must be something there. I mean, like, what do you think it is about you two that have made you so successful as CEOs?
I mean, I learned a ton from Sheryl, and she was very important to my career, especially obviously at Google. I actually think we're fairly different in some, as humans are. Well, first of all, why are we viewed as successful COOs? We made really good choices about the companies we joined as COOs.
So you're good investors, basically.
There's something there.
Time.
No,
yeah, there's
like,
something
let's
there.
not kid ourselves.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
I mean, and my perception of her relationship with Mark, and I would certainly say my experience of my relationship with John and Patrick is, I think we knew how, like, we either found founders or developed working relationships with founders where there was trust. Trust and collaboration and ability to listen to one another. And, you know, I mean, at one point Patrick said to me, some of the stuff you're doing, like decisions I would not make the same decision. He's like, but I believe that you have a good reason for doing what you're doing. And I was like, all right, that's about as good as I can get.
It's great endorsement.
Like,
great endorsement.
So, and, you know, and I was like, as long as you tell me, you know, I would check on some things, but, you know, I had to run pretty independently on a lot of stuff. I do think Mark and Sheryl, and I think he changed this, but many years later, really divided though. Like, she just took a lot of the business stuff and ran it quite independently while he really focused on product. Whereas Stripe was very collaborative, like, which I loved. We were all, like, the small executive team that we had was all doing everything together all the time, which is not super efficient, but it was very good for cohesion of, like, are we on the same page? Are we all going to, like, sort of have the same priorities and get the stuff done? And so that's really quite different, right? But I think Sheryl and I both care a lot about organizational strength and capabilities, hiring great people. How do you figure out how to do that at scale? I think we both have skills around that. Just fundamental core sales skills. Like, if you're going to build the revenue side of a company, you've got to know how to do it. And though I think she and I are both, like, more operational sales than enterprise, if that makes sense. And she's, like, super efficient. She's probably more efficient than I am. Like, if you write to Sheryl, she'll write back to you, like, really quickly, but it will be very short and terse. Whereas I'll, like, I'm going to think about it, and we might have to talk. But I think I probably spend more time on, I think, company building systems that maybe cut across functions is probably, again, because I think Sheryl ended up dividing more.
Dividing it, yeah. So you spent basically 6 months with the Collisons before joining.
I mean,
right?
I was working full time, and they were building Stripe.
Right.
We had, you know, dinners and
but maybe roughly 50 hours or something like that.
A lot of time.
So what did the 6 months after you joined look like? I mean, how can CEOs really get up to speed?
Yeah.
What did it look like for you?
Well, the 6 months after I joined, I mean, that almost feels like 100 years in startup time. You know that. I'm like, maybe the first 3 months. So I knew a lot going in. Yeah, it was helpful. I helped write the company goals. By the way, once I got in, I was like, these were not the right goals. but you know, I knew a lot going in, but I knew that I didn't know enough. And so I had to really learn the product more. I went through, like, onboarding as much as I could. I was getting pulled into stuff, but I tried to go through the classic employee onboarding, sit with support, learn the product, sit with sales. I mean, sales was like 2 people. What I did do is, because Stripe was about 160 people, I met almost everybody one-to-one. And I just, like, but intensively in the first few weeks, I had a lot of coffees, and I don't drink that much coffee, so it was like pretty brutal. I ended up having a lot of hot chocolate, but I would go for a walk, go get a coffee, and try to listen, and then I wrote a report on everything I heard. And
A report to who?
To the whole company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, I think it's if people are going to give you their time and their feedback, you want to like say, I heard you. And so it was very consistent. And actually, some of the challenges I heard then are still challenges for Stripe today. Like, your DNA is set really early. Yeah. And so I played back, like, this is what I heard, and then here's some things I think we can work on in my priorities. But meanwhile, things were burning down. Like, we had to take the inbound sales lead link off the site because we couldn't get back to leads.
Wow.
Which was a brutal decision, but I made it because I was like, if you can't write back to an interested customer, better not.
Very high class problems.
It's a very high class problem, but it's really brutal. The support team was burning down. Like, we could not keep up. And we had like 3 recruiters and we were underbuilt. And I mean, the list kind of goes on. We also had some leadership issue in engineering. There's like a bunch of challenges. And so I went to Patrick and said, so I did my listening tour. I saw the stuff was burning, like everything. And I said, okay, there's 6 things I could work on. And I cannot do 6 things in the next few months. And so you and I are going to rank them. And I'm going to tell you that I will make an impact on at least the top 3. And we agreed, and it was probably the smartest thing I did, because I think I would do this with any new executive. Like, what are you going to spend your time on that we both agree is the most important, having given them a chance to assess the situation. And it was good that I did that also because I predicted that if I didn't spend time on the support issue, it was going to explode, and it did. But I had a few months. Yeah. Like, I was like, all right, well, we knew that was going to happen. It just happened. But at least we predicted it, and I had gotten sales off the ground. Yeah. So I could turn my attention a few months later. But yeah, it was basically listening, learning, trying to get as close to the product as I could, the customer, the employees, and then triage.
And the Collisons, or maybe Patrick specifically, encourage you to meet people externally, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me about the importance of that, like meeting others.
I mean, this was one of my key lessons from them, which is I certainly had a very internal focus, which you're hearing, and some customer focus, which is a big Stripe value as well as a value of mine. But I wasn't the type as much to sort of say, let me pick up the phone and find someone who's seen this before. I mean, I guess I was overconfident in this way. I'd been at Google from about 1,800 employees to 60,000. I'd seen a lot. And I'd been in consulting before that. I'd seen a lot of the inside of a lot of companies. And I kind of had opinions, frankly, about some things that needed to be built in a certain way. And Patrick and John were very first principles. They were like, yeah, that's your opinion. And yeah, I kind of trust you. At this point, they didn't really yet. They were like, but who have you talked to? And it was a really good push. It really pushed me to expand my own network, which was a good thing to have anyway. Other COOs, people who were sort of at the next stage of company. We were going through this process of just some basic organizational stuff around job levels and ladders and some compensation fixing. And I, by the way, people think I'm an HR person because of this book. I was like, I was running HR for Stripe, but I had never run it before, folks. Let's be very clear. And I care about it a lot. I care about organizational development mostly. What I really care about is results. And if you're going to get results, you have to figure out how to organize the people to get the results. And that's what this book is really about. But we were going to make some changes. And on this one, Patrick was like, and who have you talked to? And I was like, I really do need to go talk to some people who've done this before. Right. And so I interviewed like 5. I remember going to Airbnb. I went to their office and met with like 3 or 4 people at Airbnb. And it was great because I was contemplating some stuff. And they said to me, wow, we waited too long. Some of the stuff you're contemplating doing, we wish we'd done earlier. And they really sort of cheered me on, which was good because it was painful. Right. It was really painful, and I'm glad we did do it at like 250, 300 people instead of 1,000, which is Square waited. Airbnb, a bunch of companies had waited till they were 1,000 people to put in some job structure. And it was the words that were shared with me, I'm not going to say by which company, was bloodbath. But again, back to the title thing. Right. You put people in a certain position in whatever they view the hierarchy to be, and then you change it. They are going to be unhappy.
Right.
And it was messy and not fun. but I'm still glad, so we got it done. We ripped off the Band-Aid.
So on that topic, okay, let's say, I'm a startup. Okay, now I raised my Series A. Now I'm about to raise my Series B.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. We're in a really good place right now. But we are providing a very mission critical product for our customers. And as we've scaled, to be honest, like we've dropped some balls, and to mitigate that, we have put in lots of processes. And even though we're only a Series B stage company, it's starting to feel like a very big, massive company. I think you call these defensive processes.
Oh, and as a founder, you're getting nervous because you think velocity is slow. You're like, what happened?
We need to move fast,
we're
and
slow.
What the hell? Yeah, what's going on? So help me out. Like, what did I do wrong? What went wrong here?
Yeah, so you brought up defensive processes. So I think the challenge, by the way, I think processes are good. And the reason they have a bad name, though, is because the way they get implemented is exactly that, which is we dropped balls, things went wrong, our customer called us, our partner called us, we're in trouble. So we're going to create a defensive process to prevent that bad thing from happening. And that means that whole process's orientation is to stop people and to check on them and not necessarily make them better or make them more efficient. And it's really sneaky how this happens. I mean, one of the examples I give is I remember Google had this launch cal thing where you had to flip a bit to be able to launch the product, meaning different people involved had to sort of say, yes, go. And as Google was getting bigger, this became important. But because so many things had gone wrong, the bit flips was like 27 different functions. Legal had to flip the bit. Product marketing had to flip the bit. Support had to flip the bit. And to their credit, the product managers they mutinied. They were like, we can't do our jobs. It takes us like 4 months to convince these sort of feeling like random people around the company to let us launch the thing we built.
I heard like changing a button, like a color button of a button was
super defensive. And of course people hate stuff like that. That's horrific sounding, right? And so how do you not do the defensive process thing? So one of my definitions of scale is not adding more people, which is what people think it is. I'm like, it's not. It's actually being able to repeatably be excellent with different people involved, right? So if I hired you on Monday and a few months later I said, James, how's the sales going? You're hitting quota, right? And you figured it out. Like something happened that got you to that point.
Some magic.
Yeah, congratulations. Some magic happened. So here's the situation. Every single one of you, whatever stage your company is, you have processes. There is a way you do a thing. There's a way you hire a salesperson and get them spun up. But it becomes, too many companies let that stuff live organically and be sort of implicit tribal knowledge, and they don't actually study it and say, because sales is particularly a great example. Like sales is really process driven. Like just follow the process, work your leads, and so if you just documented even the stuff you do today and then looked and said, hey, could we apply some tool to make this more efficient? Could we train people differently? You could build faster and better so you don't get to this messy stage where you're doing all this defensive stuff. And so I would just encourage companies to study the processes you do have, understand they exist, try to not make it implicit and secret knowledge, try to document it and improve it before it scales too far, and ideally automate more of it, though unfortunately we don't because AI is going to help us with this. We tend to, obviously use our engineering resources for our core product, but that's okay. But there's a way to do this well, and the bad version is you end up with a bunch of defensive processes and everyone's angry. Say the thing you think you cannot say is really about something I've learned in my career. They keep having the same pattern. And why don't you stop and say, can I share an observation with you? Does it feel like you faced something like this before? And watch, because I asked it in the form of a question, because that makes it less scary to Jane. Hey, I'm curious. It seems like this is happening. Am I wrong? Am I right? And people will get energized because often they're waiting for someone to notice. Be the person who notices. That's what that's about.
And they just some of them have not scaled up. I'm starting to think about potentially managing them out. How do I have this conversation?